I was still in my hospital gown when the nurse brought in my discharge papers, a pale yellow folder with my name misspelled on the front. The kind of mistake that shouldn't have bothered me but did. I looked around the room, at the empty chair by the window, at the wilted flowers that hadn't been replaced in days, and I realized something I hadn't dared admit out loud. They weren't coming. Not my daughter, not my son-in-law. Not even the grandchildren who used to wrap themselves round my legs like ivy. Just days earlier, I had come out of surgery, a total hip replacement that was no small feat at my age, and someone had told me, probably a nurse, probably too kindly, that my family had left for Paris, a pre-planned trip. They said, "They'll be back soon." I nodded, but my chest collapsed in on itself, like I had fallen through the center of the bed without moving. They had waited until I was under anesthesia. Until I was quiet, still, vulnerable, and then they flew. Away to crepes and Eiffel Towers, and photos with cartoon hearts and filters. My daughter posted a picture of the whole family at a Parisian cafe 2 days after my operation. I saw it while scrolling through my phone with one shaky finger. They looked radiant. My granddaughter was holding a pastry. My daughter had a scarf wrapped around her neck, like I used to wear. The caption said, "Finally, a real family vacation." I'm Elaine Holloway, I'm 71, and that was the moment I knew I was no longer part of their story. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. The doctor asked if someone would be picking me up. I said no, then I said maybe, then I said I wasn't sure. I didn't want to admit the truth, that I didn't want to call them. Even if I did, I wasn't sure they'd answer. I paid for a cab with the cash I kept hidden in my robe pocket. The driver helped me into the back seat, and the whole ride home I stared at the small pill bottle in my hand, wondering how something so simple, white plastic, orange label, could make me feel both cared for and completely forgotten. My condo was dark when I arrived. I shuffled in with my walker, dragging one foot a little behind the other like a tired shadow. The air smelled stale, as if the silence had been holding its breath. I sat in the armchair by the window and watched the sky change. The birds flew in patterns. The light disappeared behind the rooftops. I hadn't cried yet, but I knew it was coming. It always did when no one was watching. On the coffee table sat a brochure, still open from weeks ago, a family photo, the words "Lifetime of Memories" printed over a picture of a beach. That timeshare had been my gift to them. My husband and I bought it back in 1994, when the kids were teenagers and still spoke to us like we were people, not burdens. We paid it off slowly, scraping money from car repairs and birthday dinners. It was meant to be passed down, a tradition, a place to gather, but they didn't gather, not anymore. They scattered. They made plans without me, ate together without me, laughed in another country while I learned to walk again. I called no one that first night, just heated soup, took my pills, slept with the lamp on like I used to when my husband was alive. He died 5 years ago, and since then the house has echoed with all the things we never thought would happen, like being forgotten, like becoming unnecessary, like watching your daughter choose a hotel in France over a hospital bed in her hometown. I turned on the TV just for noise, but I didn't watch it. I just sat there with my hands folded in my lap, fingers tracing the groove where my wedding ring used to be. That night, as the wind knocked against the windows and the radiator clicked like old bones settling, I let myself ask the question that had been hiding in my chest for years. What am I still doing here? Not on this earth. I wasn't suicidal. But here, in their lives, in the margins of their vacations, in the quiet spaces between their smiles, I was like a ghost they still addressed in holiday cards, a signature on birthday checks, a name to include when listing surviving relatives, should they ever need to. And at that moment, I stopped waiting for them to call. I stopped hoping for a knock at the door. I looked at that timeshare brochure and realized something strange and sharp. It wasn't mine anymore, OT in their eyes, it belonged to them. Like I had transferred ownership without even realizing it. They thought they'd get it someday, use it for more family vacations, more cafes in Europe, more smiling pictures that never made room for me. But they forgot something. I'm still here. I still have a name on the deed. I still have access. I still remember the customer service number and the code my husband and I picked, his old military number, back when honor meant something. I slept well that night, not because I felt loved, but because I'd finally stopped pretending. That was the first night in years I didn't check my phone before bed. I didn't wonder what they were doing, didn't reread messages for tone. I just turned off the lamp, laid back against the pillow, and stared into the darkness like it was an old friend who'd been waiting patiently for me to return. When they got back from Paris, sun-kissed and smug, they wouldn't know yet, not about the call I made, not about the quiet paperwork being processed, not about the man on the other end of the line who said, "Yes, Ms. Holloway, you can absolutely sell it," but they would, oh, they would. And when that day came, I would not raise my voice, I would not explain, I would not apologize for doing what they had done long before me. Let go. Quietly, permanently, and I would not look back. I used to believe that love was shown best in the background, not in declarations or dramatic gestures, but in the things no one notices, the lunches packed before sunrise, the socks folded just the way they liked, the bills paid without question. My husband, Richard, used to say I had the soul of a lighthouse, steady, constant, always shining, even when no one looked up to see it. When we first had our daughter, I gave up my job at the library. I told myself I'd go back eventually, once she was older, once we could afford daycare. But time moves differently inside the walls of our little home. Days turned into months, and then years. I was always needed, until I wasn't. I ironed school uniforms with starch. Even when she said nobody else's mother bothered, I made birthday cakes shaped like castles and dinosaurs. I kept every drawing she made, even the scribbles that were just loops of color. I helped her memorize spelling words. I stayed up with her when she had fevers and once slept on the floor beside her bed when she was afraid of a storm. And then there were the bigger things, the quiet sacrifices. We sold Richard's motorcycle when money got tight after his second layoff. I took a night shift at a friend's bakery just to make ends meet. We never told her that her dance lessons cost us our anniversary trip. She still talks about how lucky she was to dance in Chicago. She doesn't know it was funded by pawning my engagement ring. I thought that's what being a mother meant, giving, always giving, without expecting thanks. But I didn't do it for gratitude. I truly didn't. I did it because I loved her more than breathing. Because her happiness felt like my own. Because when you become a mother, your heart becomes porous, 1,000 tiny holes that leak warmth into someone else's life. After she married, I tried to respect her new world. I stayed in the background, just like before, always there, always steady. I helped them with the down payment on their house. Using the small inheritance Richard's mother had left us, I babysat when the kids were small, sometimes for days at a time. I never asked for money. I told them to go enjoy themselves, take the weekend. I'll make pancakes and turn the living room into a fort when they couldn't find a preschool they liked. I kept the youngest with me full-time for 8 months. I was 65 then. My knees ached and I had trouble getting off the floor after playing. But I never told them that. I just smiled and said, "We had a lovely day." Even when I was too tired to cook dinner for myself, they called me selfless. That was the word they liked to use. But selflessness is just another way of saying invisible, isn't it? The timeshare had been my idea. A way to hold onto something that felt permanent. When Richard and I bought it, we imagined summers by the water, grandchildren splashing at our feet, dinners on the deck with stories and grilled peaches. It was the one indulgence we allowed ourselves after he retired, a future carved in sun and sand, but it became theirs, without conversation, without acknowledgement, slowly. They began booking it without telling me. "We figured you weren't up for traveling," they'd say, or "It's just easier this way." Once I found out they'd gone when I saw the photos online. My daughter and her husband clinking wine glasses on the balcony I once painted yellow. They told me I was welcome to join, but only after the plans were set, always as an afterthought, never a seat at the table, just a cushion on the porch, if I could make my way there on my own. Still, I kept showing up. I sent Christmas cards. Even when they forgot mine, I baked their favorite pies for Thanksgiving, even though they started spending it with his family instead. I mailed birthday gifts. I never saw them open. And when they called, which wasn't often, I made sure to ask about their lives, the kids' grades, their projects, their neighbors, because I knew they wouldn't ask about mine, and even then. I didn't stop giving. That's what lingers, you know. Not the big betrayals, it's the 1,000 little kindnesses you gave that were never noticed, the way you protected their secrets, the way you carried their burdens. The way you loved them so deeply they never thought to wonder if you needed anything in return. After my surgery, I had one voicemail. It was my daughter saying they were on the fence about the Paris trip. She felt bad, but the tickets were non-refundable. She said she'd call again once they landed. She didn't. Not for 11 days. I remember lying there, trying to find the silver lining. Maybe they'll bring me something, I thought. A scarf, a pastry, a postcard. Something to show I'd been remembered. But there was nothing. When they returned, they sent a text. "Glad you're home safe. Paris was amazing. Let's chat soon. Let's chat soon." 3 words that said everything. I was no longer someone they checked on, just someone they updated, like a distant relative, a subscriber to their lives. Sometimes I think about all the things I could have done differently. Maybe I should have spoken up more. Maybe I should have asked for help. Maybe I should have insisted on being part of their world instead of quietly orbiting it. But then I remember the weight of their childhoods in my hands, the scraped knees I kissed, the sleepless nights I spent watching them breathe, the meals cooked, the laundry folded. The tears caught in my blouse, and I know I was never the one who failed to show up. They were, and now, in the stillness of this house, I carry those memories like medals, not to display, but to remind myself that I gave everything I had, and then some. So when I made that call about the timeshare, it wasn't out of vengeance, it was something simpler, more honest. It was the first thing I had done purely for myself in decades, and it would not be the last. It's strange how pain can live inside the smallest things. It doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it shows up in the way someone forgets to say goodnight, or how long it takes them to reply to a message. It hides in the silence that stretches between visits, in the birthdays that go uncelebrated, in the mailboxes that stay empty except for bills and advertisements. After Richard died, there were the expected condolences. My daughter stayed a few nights. My son-in-law brought groceries. The grandchildren sat stiffly on the edge of the couch like they were visiting a stranger's house. Everyone was kind in the way people are when they're checking a box, polite, brief, ready to return to their lives. That was the beginning of the long, slow fade at first. I convinced myself they were just busy, new jobs, new schools, new routines. Life moves fast when you're raising a family. I told myself. I remembered what it was like to be their age, calendars filled with dentist appointments and school performances and weekend errands. So I waited, patiently, quietly. I called. Once a week, sometimes twice. I baked cookies and dropped them off when no one was home. I sent texts with old photos of their childhoods. No response, or maybe just a heart emoji, eventually. Even those stopped coming. One afternoon, about a year after the funeral, I drove across town just to leave a pumpkin pie on their porch. I had spent the whole morning making it from scratch, the way Richard used to like it, cinnamon heavy, with the crust folded by hand. I placed it on their welcome mat and sent a quick message saying, "Left something sweet for you." It was never acknowledged. Later that week, I saw it in a photo on my granddaughter's Instagram story, still in the dish, half-eaten beside a mug of cider, captioned, "Thanks to whoever made this." Whoever, I didn't say anything. I just stopped baking pies. Then there were the small gatherings, family barbecues I learned about after they happened. Birthdays where I saw the decorations in photos online, balloons and candles in backyard. Games. Once I asked casually, "How was your weekend?" My daughter answered, "Oh, just quiet, stayed in mostly." But the internet told a different story. There they were, smiling in matching outfits, clinking drinks with friends, posing in front of a cake that had a name spelled in pink icing. It wasn't mine. I remember the time I offered to pick up the kids from school during a work emergency. I was only 10 minutes away, and I'd kept a spare booster seat in my car for years. But she hesitated, said it was fine, they'd already figured it out. Later, I found out they'd called a neighbor instead, a woman I'd never met. When I asked about it, my daughter shrugged. "We just didn't want to trouble you, trouble me." As if I hadn't sat beside hospital beds and driven through storms. As if I hadn't changed diapers at 3 a.m. and stayed up helping with science projects. As if I wasn't the one who watched them cry when they failed their first driving test. Trouble me. I had given up entire chapters of my life for their comfort, but I said nothing. I smiled, I nodded, I told her I understood. And in that moment, a new fracture formed, small, invisible, but deep. That's how it works. The breaking, it doesn't happen all at once. It's not one fight or one cruel word. It's 100 quiet hurts that settle into the corners of your heart like dust. You don't notice them until one day you look around and everything is covered in grey. Mother's Day became an email, my birthday, a text message with a balloon gif. Once I mentioned to my daughter that I was going in for a minor procedure, nothing urgent. Just something the doctor wanted checked. She nodded, half listening, and then changed the subject. The day of the procedure, I took a cab there and back. No one called to ask how it went. The only message I received that day was a forwarded video of the kids dancing to some song I didn't recognize. Loneliness is different when it's carved by people you love. It's not the absence of company, it's the ache of being unseen by the ones who used to run to you when they scraped their knees. It's knowing every detail of their childhood, the foods they hated, the lullabies they loved, and realizing they don't even remember the year you had shingles, or the way your hands tremble when you're tired, or the fact that you always sleep with a glass of water by the bed. They don't ask how you're doing. Not really. Not with intention. Not with space for the truth. They ask out of habit, or not at all. I stopped trying to explain. What would I even say? That their absence is louder than any argument. That being ignored by someone you raised feels like walking through your own home and finding the walls no longer recognize you. Instead, I kept busy. I sorted my pantry, took short walks around the block, read the same novels again and again, until the words felt like company. I talked to Richard sometimes out loud like he was still in the room. I told him about the weather, about the way the mailman always puts the envelopes in crooked, about the birds on the balcony. I told him I missed him. I told him I was trying. The timeshare was one of the last threads I was still clinging to. It was more than property. It was a memory. It was a promise. It was that final piece of the world we had imagined, a world where family meant warmth, where holidays were shared, where traditions mattered. But they didn't see it that way. To them, it was a vacation spot, a free getaway. something they'd use once a year and forget in between. They didn't know about the night Richard and I first saw it in a brochure, or how we saved for 3 years to afford the down payment. They didn't know that the deck railing still had the initials we carved into the wood one summer with a pocket knife. It wasn't about money. It never was. It was about being remembered, seen, cherished, and I wasn't. So when I picked up the phone and called the resort office, I didn't hesitate. The woman on the line asked if I was sure. I said yes. She said I'd need to complete some paperwork. I told her I already had the forms. I printed them 2 weeks ago. I had waited long enough. And still, I didn't tell them. Not yet. I wanted to see if they'd notice, if they'd check in, if they'd remember I existed beyond convenience, if they'd ask how I was healing, how I was walking, how the nights felt now without a husband or a visitor. But they didn't. They went on planning their next trip, and I went on filling the silence with the only thing I had left, resolve. It wasn't the Paris trip, not really. That was just the most convenient betrayal, the most photogenic, the one that finally peeled back the curtain I had spent too many years holding in place. But the moment they truly crossed the line, the one you don't come back from, came quietly, like most betrayals do. No confrontation, no shouting, just a single envelope that changed everything. It arrived in mid-March, the sky still carried the weight of winter, and the birds outside my window had only just started testing their morning songs again. I remember because I'd been standing at the sink rinsing out a teacup when the postman slid it through the slot. The thud was soft, almost apologetic. I didn't open it right away. It was addressed to me, but the return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. I assumed it was junk. Some form of letter offering estate planning or retirement investments. I placed it in a neat pile with the electricity bill and my latest insurance statement. That night, I warmed up leftover stew and watched a rerun of a baking competition. I didn't touch the envelope. Something in me already knew. The next morning, with a foggy cup of coffee in one hand, I finally opened it. The letter was brief, painless in its tone, punctuated with legal phrases and passive verbs. It explained that, at the request of the property's primary beneficiaries, the timeshare had been transferred into a new family trust. That trust did not include me. There was no mention of how. No space to protest, no invitation to discuss. Just a sentence that read, all future correspondence should be directed to the family trustee, Ms. Laurel Dean, my daughter. They had already done it, somehow, without telling me. Without asking me, without even the grace of a phone call. They had removed my name from something I paid for, something Richard and I had signed together. I don't know how they managed it. Maybe I'd signed something unknowingly during my recovery, or perhaps they found some clause buried in fine print, taking advantage of my fading eyesight and my trust. But I knew what it meant. They had decided I was finished, not dead, exactly. But it is no longer a factor, no longer relevant, no longer entitled to the places, the memories, or the shared spaces I once called ours. I sat at the table for a long time, the letter spread out in front of me like a broken heirloom. My fingers didn't shake, my eyes didn't cry, I just stared. I remember watching the steam rise from my untouched coffee until it disappeared, completely, leaving only the bitter reminder of what had once been warm. It wasn't even about the timeshare, not anymore. It could have been a car, a photo album, an old lamp. It was about the assumption. The quiet decision was made without me. The idea that I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't care, or worse, that I didn't matter. I called the resort company. I asked for records. I asked questions. The woman on the other end was polite but hesitant. Eventually, after confirming my name and account number, she said something that left me cold. Oh, the transfer request came through last month, signed by the trust's administrator. We assumed you'd already approved it. You were listed as a former party of interest. Former, that word stuck to me like static. I hung up, folded the letter, and slid it into a drawer next to my old sewing needles and Richard's last birthday card. For a long time, I just sat there, no plan, no fury. Just the kind of silence that comes when you realize you've outlived your usefulness in the eyes of the very people you built your life around. That night, I didn't sleep, not in the real sense. I laid in bed with my hands resting on my chest, like I was waiting for something to stop. Not my heart, but maybe the ache of it. I kept replaying memories like reels of a film I wasn't in anymore. Laurel in her first recital dress. The summer we saved for a road trip and sang out of tune, with the windows down. That year she was sick and I slept on the floor beside her bed, just to hear her breathing. I thought of all the small, quiet ways I had said, "I love you," over the years, through casseroles and mended socks and stories read aloud at night. None of them were enough to keep me in the room. The next day, I made an appointment with a local attorney. Her office was modest, warm, even she wore reading glasses and had a photograph of her aging mother on the shelf behind her desk. When I told her what had happened, she listened, really listened, and then she said something I hadn't heard in years. "You still have options." It was like someone handed me my name back. We spent 3 hours going over paperwork, tracing signatures, verifying the terms Richard and I had agreed to all those years ago. And as it turned out, the transfer wasn't legal, not fully, not without my consent, somewhere along the way. Someone had overstepped, assumed, used my silence as permission. But silence is not consent. Silence is not absence. Silence is sometimes just heartbreak with no place left to go. So I began to reclaim what was mine, not for revenge, not to punish, but because I could, because I was still here, because someone needed to remember who paid the first deposit, who signed the first page, who dreamed the dream. I didn't tell them what I was doing. I didn't need to. Let them keep planning their summer getaway. Let them imagine the same ocean, the same balcony, the same breeze, without realizing that the air had shifted. The paperwork was finalized the following week. I signed it with a steady hand. The resort's name printed in soft grey across the top, a new owner listed. A simple line, Elaine Holloway, sole title holder, no trustee, no shared rights, just me. It wasn't about taking anything away. It was about finally holding something that had always belonged to me. And as I left the attorney's office and stepped into the afternoon light, I felt something I hadn't in years, not satisfied, not triumph, but a quiet return to myself, and that I knew was enough. After I reclaimed the timeshare, I didn't rush to tell them. There was no announcement, no confrontation, no cold email signed with a trembling hand. I simply withdrew, not in anger, in clarity. Something inside me had settled, the way snow quiets a street, the impulse to explain myself, to justify why I mattered. To beg for a seat at a table I had once set had disappeared. For the first time in years, I had no appetite for being understood. I stopped calling. That was the first shift, not out of spite, but out of recognition. I had always been the one to reach out, to check in, to ask about school projects and work stress, and what flavor of cake the kids wanted for their next birthday. I realized that if I didn't do it, no one would. So I didn't. I turned off the little reminder on my phone that used to ping every Saturday morning. Text Laurel, that small, digital nudge I'd given myself so she wouldn't feel I'd forgotten her. It hadn't occurred to me until then that she never needed one. For me, the silence that followed was soft at first, almost comfortable. Like removing a pair of shoes that had been pinching for years, it gave me room to breathe in a way I hadn't realized I needed. My days became simpler. I listened to the radio while I cooked. I opened the windows earlier, let the breeze in. I went for longer walks, even if my hip ached by the end. It was a good kind of ache, the kind you earn. And with that quiet came thought, reflection, the kind that only arrives when the noise of other people's needs fades away. I started to think about all the years I had lost trying to be indispensable, how much of my identity I had wrapped around service, around being someone's mother, someone's helper, someone's stand-by. There was a time when I believed that if I loved enough, if I was generous enough, flexible enough, available enough, they would never leave me behind. But people don't always stay where they're loved. Sometimes they go where they feel least required to give anything back. That truth didn't sting as much anymore. Not in the quiet, it was just a fact. I kept my movement small, paid off some old bills, went through the hall closet and donated things I no longer needed, clothes from another life, a pair of shoes I hadn't worn since Richard's retirement dinner, an unopened box of party streamers from a birthday I once planned but was never asked to repeat. I also began to journal, nothing elaborate, just little pages of memory and observation. A note about the hummingbird that returned to the balcony, a memory of Laurel's second birthday when she ate the frosting before the cake. Some pages were angry, most were not, mostly. They were just honest. I met with the lawyer one more time, not to make trouble, but to ask quiet questions about rights and planning, and how to protect what remained. She explained trusts in more detail, wills, power of attorney. I realized how many things I had left in the hands of people who hadn't called in months, so I adjusted them. I rewrote my will, I changed the executor. I added a clause, one sentence that read, "In the event of demonstrable estrangement, this shall be honoured without obligation toward those who no longer maintain relationship with the deceased." It wasn't legal poetry, but it was mine. I didn't name names, I didn't need to. I just built a legal reflection of the emotional boundaries I had finally accepted. Still, I kept my door unlocked during the day. Still, I left a second mug beside the kettle, just in case. I wasn't bitter. I was simply learning to be less available to people who had made a sport of overlooking me. And when the first text came 5 weeks after the Paris trip, 3 weeks after I had reclaimed the timeshare, I let it sit unread for an entire day. It said, "Hey, Mom, how are you feeling?" I stared at it, not with anger, not with longing, but with the measured gaze of someone who has just watched the tide go out and realized how far it had taken her. I didn't reply that day, or the next, not out of punishment, but because I was no longer in a rush to be heard by someone who hadn't listened for years. Instead, I watered my plants. I checked on the garlic cloves I had planted in the spring. I changed my sheets. I went to the post office and mailed a letter to an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in decades. That afternoon, I sat with the timeshare paperwork again, not to reread the legal terms, but to look at my own signature, firm, balanced. A mark of someone who had done something difficult without needing anyone else to applaud it. I put it back in the drawer, beside the old photos, beside Richard's watch I could never bring myself to wear, beside the letters Laurel used to write to me from summer camp. There was one with crayon flowers around the edges. It said, "You're the best mom in the world. Don't forget me." Funny, I hadn't. But maybe, somewhere along the way, she had forgotten herself. Or at least the part of her that used to run into my arms like they were shelter from the rain. In the silence, I didn't miss the noise. I missed the truth, the shared truth between two people who once believed love was made of showing up, not just when it was easy, but when it was required. And maybe that's what I was doing now. Finally showing up. For myself, it didn't happen overnight. The change in me, there was no dramatic haircut, no suitcase by the door, no sudden announcement that I was leaving it all behind. That kind of drama never appealed to me, even when it was deserved. Instead, I moved differently, Slower in some ways, faster in others, quieter, always, but with more intention. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I used to keep it close. To me, like an extension of hope, the first thing I reached for in the morning, the last thing I looked at before sleep. Now, it sat on the kitchen counter most days, face down, volume off. If someone needed me, they could try, but I wasn't holding my breath for it. Instead, I began to notice things I had once brushed aside, the way the light changed in my living room across the seasons, the quiet sigh my chair gave when I sank into it in the evening, the warm pulse of the kettle just before it clicked off. I started writing letters again. Not the kind you send, just small notes, handwritten on note paper. I'd found at a flea market years ago, thick, creamy paper that felt more permanent than screens. I wrote to Richard, mostly. I told him about the neighbours, about the hip that still aches on rainy mornings, about the silence that no longer scared me. I tucked the letters into a wooden box I kept on my bookshelf, beside a stack of library cards and a dried rose from our 40th anniversary. I didn't think of it as loneliness anymore, just quiet, and quiet is survivable. I had more space now, emotionally, mentally, even physically, without the weight of constant hope. I began filling that space with different things. I took a calligraphy class at the senior centre. I didn't know a soul there, and I didn't try to make friends. Not at first. I just went, every Tuesday, sat at the back. Let the sound of nibs scratching paper remind me that I was still capable of learning something new. One of the women in the class, Anita, eventually sat beside me. She smelled of talcum powder and strong coffee. We never talked about family. We talked about ink, about how hard it was to get the right rhythm, but it was a friendship, a quiet one, the kind built on shared space, not shared history. I also called the timeshare offers one last time, not to cancel, not to change anything, just to book a week, for myself, late September, when the air is still warm, but the crowds are gone. I told them I didn't need the master suite, just the smaller unit would do. I wanted a room with a window facing the water, nothing else. The girl on the line said, "We usually reserve that one for larger parties." I told her I understood, and then I asked her to look at how long my name had been on the deed. She came back a few minutes later and said it was done. I hung up smiling. There was power in reclaiming your own signature. I didn't tell Laurel. I didn't post about it. I just packed a small bag, 2 paperbacks, a sweater, and a tin of tea and went. The drive was longer than I remembered. My joints stiffened a little from sitting too long, but I stopped when I needed to. I ate lunch at a roadside diner, the kind with cracked leather booths and waitresses who call you sweetheart no matter how old you are. I tipped well. I always have. When I arrived, the woman at the check-in desk was young and polite. She handed me the keys and said, "We don't get many guests who come alone." I smiled and said, "That's a shame. They don't know what they're missing." The room was clean and simple. A modest little kitchen, a bed that didn't squeak, and a balcony with 2 chairs. I chose the one facing west. Every evening, I sat there with a blanket on my lap, watching the sky bleed into the ocean. No television, no calls, just that slow, endless exhale of the tide. One morning, I walked along the shoreline, slowly but steadily, the sand under my feet, soft and forgiving. I thought of the summer Laurel turned 12. She built a sandcastle just beyond where the tide reached, and when it finally collapsed hours later, she cried like it had been made of gold. Richard told her that nothing beautiful survives without care. I wondered if she ever remembered that. I didn't swim, I didn't go sightseeing, I didn't explore nearby towns. I simply stayed, sat, breathed. I made eggs in the morning, folded the blankets at night. I watched couples pass by, families dragging beach towels and juice boxes, and Sun hats. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't sad. I had simply stopped waiting to be part of someone else's plan. On the last day, I left a note in the guest book, not signed, just written. Sometimes being alone is just peace that nobody else claims. Back home, the air had cooled, autumn in the curtains. A softness in the evening light. I unpacked. Slowly, humming a tune I didn't recognize but that felt familiar. I put the calligraphy supplies back in their drawer, washed my travel cup, and folded my sweater, everything in its place. And then the phone rang. I let it ring for times before. Picking up, it was Laurel. Her voice was bright, falsely casual. "Hey, Mum, we've been trying to figure out the timeshare schedule and noticed the system says it's unavailable. Was that a mistake?" I paused. "No, I booked it." She laughed, a touch too loudly. "Oh, you're going with someone." "No," I said. "I went alone. Just got back." A beat of silence. "Oh, well, next time maybe let us know. We were hoping to take the kids in the fall." "I understand," I said. Another pause. "Is everything okay?" I thought about that for a moment. "Yes," I said. "Everything's fine." And for once, I meant it. She didn't ask much else. Just said, "Okay, well, talk soon." I said goodbye. She hung up. And I sat there, the line still warm in my hand, knowing I had finally turned a corner, not away from her, but toward something I had never really known how to hold myself. They didn't notice it at first, the shift, that slow, steady unraveling, of something they had always assumed would stay put. I suppose when someone has always been there, always answered the phone, always shown up, you stop seeing them as a choice. You start seeing them as a given. But I was no longer a given. I was a boundary now, a silence where noise used to be. The first ripple came in early October. Laurel sent another text. This time about Thanksgiving. Just a single line. You planning anything this year, or should we do our usual? The usual. The usual meant I would host, cook for 2 days, set the table with napkin rings Laurel never noticed, clean up afterward, and package leftovers for them to take home, all while being told how lucky they were to have a mom who still did it all. I stared at the message. I let it sit for hours, unopened, unread on her end, not out of malice. I just wanted her to feel, even for a moment, what waiting felt like. That evening, I replied, "No plans this year. I'll be traveling." Her response came quickly. "Oh, where to?" I didn't answer, because the truth was I didn't owe her my plans. My whereabouts were no longer hers to assume. It was the kind of boundary that feels invisible to the world but seismic to the person who never thought it would exist. I spent Thanksgiving alone by choice. I made a single portion of roasted chicken, mashed sweet potatoes, and cranberry compote. I set a place at the table, not for anyone else, but for myself. I used the good linen, the gold-edged plate, the wine glass Richard had once bought as part of an anniversary set. I lit a candle, not in mourning, in honor. After dinner, I went for a walk. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that nips at your cheeks but wakes something ancient inside you. I passed homes with crowded driveways and windows glowing with laughter. And for the first time, I didn't ache to be inside any of them. The following week, Laurel called. I answered. She sounded distracted at first, talking about how chaotic things had been. How the kids were outgrowing their shoes faster than she could keep up. Then her voice slowed. "I tried calling you on Thursday." "I know," I said. "I just didn't expect you to be gone." "I didn't go far," I replied. "Just far enough." There was a pause. "You could have come here," she offered. "The kids missed you." Did they ask about me? She didn't answer that, and that silence, that small, tight silence, said more than any excuse could. In December, the Christmas questions began. Who was hosting? Who would bring what? When we would do gifts, I didn't answer right away. I wasn't being difficult. I was just deciding. You see, I used to say yes to everything, even when I was Tired, even when I didn't feel seen, even when the invitation felt more like a formality than a true desire to be with me. But now I took time. I weighed each invitation not as an obligation, but as a question: would this bring me peace? And, more often than not, the answer was no. I spent Christmas morning by the fireplace, the one Richard and I had installed ourselves back when we still believed in snowmen and surprises. I opened a single gift, a scarf I had wear upon for myself over the course of several quiet nights. It was imperfect, the rose slightly uneven, but it was warm, honest, mine. Later, I received a group photo from Laurel's living room, the kids in pajamas, Laurel holding a mug. Her husband's arm casually draped across the back of the couch. There was space beside her, where I might have sat, had things been different, but I didn't feel relieved. I felt absent, and rightly so. It was then that I realized they weren't thriving without me, not in the way they thought they would. The organization of things faltered, traditions loosened. I saw it in the way she scrambled to host, in the way the meals became store-bought instead of homemade, in the messages that came too late, too vague, too hollow, and more than that. I saw it in her voice, the way it reached now where before it had retreated, the sudden question she never used to ask: what have you been up to? Have you been seeing anyone? Are you feeling all right these days? I answered kindly, briefly. I wasn't punished. I didn't rub salt in wounds. I simply spoke like someone who no longer needed to be needed. They had lost something, though I don't think they fully understood what. It wasn't just me, or my casseroles, or my presence at holidays. It was the certainty of me, the foundation, the rhythm. They lost the person who reminded them of who they were before they got too busy to remember. The one who kept the stories. Who knew the baby teeth they lost, the lullabies they liked, the names of every stuffed animal. Without me, the family thread frayed, not catastrophically, not publicly, but undeniably. And they didn't know how to sew it back together. One night, in early January, I received a handwritten card from my oldest granddaughter. It was short, uneven penmanship, a child's honesty. I miss you, Grandma. I told Mom we should visit. I made you something. I smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something shift, not the ache of erasure, but the memory of connection, something that wasn't demanded or expected. Just offered. I didn't rush to respond, but I did pull out a blank card. I wrote her a short note back, told her I missed her too, that I hoped school was going well, that the tea rose she helped me plant last spring had bloomed before the frost. I signed it simply. Love always, Grandma. Then I added a line at the bottom, just one. Sometimes you have to step away for people to remember where you stood, and maybe, just maybe, someone was beginning to. I found the letter by accident. It was tucked in an old recipe book I hadn't touched in years, the kind with splattered pages and my own handwriting in the margins. Little notes about extra cinnamon or reminders to stir longer when Richard was in the room. Because he liked the smell. I was reaching for a scone recipe. Though I wasn't planning to bake, I think I just wanted the comfort of looking at something that had once brought people around my table. And there it was, a folded sheet of cream-coloured paper, with soft creases, as though it had been carried around in a coat pocket too long. The handwriting was mine, older, tighter, more careful than the loose loops I use now. I recognized it before I even opened it. I had written it almost 4 years ago. Just weeks after Richard passed. Back then, I had sat at the dining room table one afternoon, while the house still smelled faintly of flowers and casseroles left behind by neighbours. Laurel had gone back to her house. The children were too young to understand the depth of what had changed, and I had sat there, trying to talk to someone who was no longer breathing but somehow still in the room. I had forgotten I'd ever written it. The letter began simply, "Dear Richard, you would have known what to say, wouldn't you? You always did. even when I was quiet, especially then. You had that gift of noticing the things no one else did. The way I curled my toes when I was nervous, the way I filled the silence with small tasks, the way I said I'm fine when I wasn't. I miss being seen like that. I paused there, staring at the word seen, and felt it stir again, that hollow feeling I'd grown so used to. The letter continued, and I read it slowly, as though it were being written again just for me. I don't know how to be alone. Not really. I know how to function. I know how to make lists and clean and smile and say it's okay. But I don't know how to feel whole without being someone else's center. Maybe that's the danger of loving deeply. You pour so much of yourself into others that you forget how to carry what's left. There was a smudge near the bottom of the page. I must have been crying when I wrote it. Or maybe the pen had caught a drop of tea. I went on. Laurel's doing what she can, I think, or maybe she isn't. I can't tell anymore. There's a distance between us I don't know how to cross. She calls, but it's different. I think she loved you more than she knew, and without you, she's turned her love inward. I don't blame her. But it hurts. I folded the letter again and held it in my lap for a long time. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was just honest. A small offering from a version of me who had not yet hardened, who had not yet stopped reaching. And yet, reading it now, it felt less like a wound and more like a reflection. Proof that I had already begun this journey long before Paris, long before the surgery, long before the silence. I had already been learning how to grieve, how to let go, how to unhook myself from the need to be necessary. It made me want to write another letter, not to Richard this time, but to myself. I found a new sheet of paper, one of the soft blue ones I used for birthday cards. I lit the little candle on my writing desk, the one that smelled of sandalwood, and something sweet, and I began, "Dear Elaine, you didn't break, even when it felt like you had. You bent, you paused. You wept quietly in kitchens and stairwells and once in the grocery store parking lot, but you didn't break. You kept showing up, even when no one thanked you. You kept loving, even when it wasn't returned the way you deserved. You offered your heart like a porch light, steady, warm, always waiting. But it's not your job anymore. You are not a supporting character. You are not a coat rack. You are not the pause between someone else's sentences. You are a woman who once danced barefoot in the living room while Richard hummed off-key. You are a woman who raised a daughter with gentle hands and unspoken strength. You are a woman who has learned to enjoy her own company without apology. You are not erased. You are redefined. Let the silence be a kindness now, not a punishment. Let it remind you that you've earned the right to rest, to dream small dreams, to make soup for one, to choose solitude not out of sadness, but out of reverence. You do not need to explain the years you gave. They are etched into time, and the ones who remember, they'll find their way back if they're meant to. You don't need to go searching anymore. You are already home. I signed the letter without a name, just a date, just a moment in time. Then I folded it and placed it next to the old one, in the same box that held Laurel's camp letters, Richard's last Christmas note, and the ultrasound photo of my first grandchild, a blurred, hopeful swirl of becoming. I didn't cry. I felt something softer than sadness, a release, like untying a ribbon that had been knotted for too long. The next day, I walked to the post office. I mailed a card to my granddaughter, a real one, no occasion. Just a blank card with a watercolor of 2 birds on a branch. I wrote only a sentence. Inside, sometimes we don't know we miss someone until they write us back into the world. And I signed it, Love, Grandma, always. Then I stepped back into the light, pulled my coat a little tighter around me and walked home. Not waiting for anything, just walking, just home. These days, the house stays quieter than it used to. I no longer fill it with the need to be busy. I don't turn on the television for background noise. I don't play music to drown out the stillness. I let the silence breathe around me, soft, spacious, whole. There's a rhythm to this quiet life. I wake when the sun touches the edge of my curtain. I make my tea in a chipped ceramic mug I've had for over 20 years. It's the only one I reach for now. I sit by the window with a small wool blanket draped over my knees, listening to the sounds outside. Birds fussing on the wire, a distant lawnmower, wind teasing the edge of the roof. There are no more calendars cluttered with reminders to call. No alarm set for family gatherings I'm expected to host. The pressure to remain essential to someone else's life has lifted. And in its place, there is room, not just in the house, but in my chest. I breathe more fully now. Some days I garden. I never had a talent for it before. Richard was always the one with the green thumb, but now I try. My lavender bloomed this year for the first time. I like the way the bees come around late morning and hover with purpose. I talk to them sometimes without realizing it, not out of loneliness, but because it feels natural, like someone is listening, even if it's only the wind and the wings. I've started writing again, too. Not long letters or journals, just brief thoughts on note cards. I keep them in a small wooden recipe box on my nightstand. Sometimes they're just single sentences. Even an empty chair holds weight. Memory doesn't ask for permission. Love that gives everything without asking becomes invisible until it vanishes. They aren't profound, but they are mine. I walk more, slower than I used to, but with intention. There's a bench by the library, under a crooked tree that drops yellow leaves even in summer. I sit there often and watch people come and go, mothers with strollers, teens with headphones, old couples who still walk in sync. I don't feel envy, just presence. I watch them and think, this moment is enough. Last week, Laurel came by. She didn't call first, and for a moment I considered not answering the door. But something in me softened. She stood there with a pie, store-bought. Pete. Her eyes were tired in a way I recognized. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 months. I thought maybe we could talk. She said. I let her in. We sat at the table I once filled with roast dinners and birthday cakes. I served tea in mismatched mugs. She looked around like she didn't remember where anything went. I think she expected the house to look different, darker, perhaps, lonelier. But I had rearranged things. Removed what I didn't need, kept only what made the space feel like mine. We didn't talk about Paris, we didn't talk about the timeshare. Instead, she asked about the garden. She asked if I'd heard about her promotion. She said the kids had been asking why Grandma didn't come around anymore. I didn't answer all of it. I just listened, nodded, watched her face, and then she said, very softly, I think I forgot how much you were holding. That sentence sat between us. For a long time, I didn't say, yes, you did. I didn't say, it hurt. I didn't say anything. But I think she knew. Before she left, she asked if she could come again next week. I told her she could. After she left, I sat back down by the window, lit the little candle, and opened the latest book I'd been reading. It was one of those quiet novels where not much happens, but everything still shifts. I like stories like that now, ones that don't need to impress or shock, ones that just sit with you and breathe. That night, I opened the box of note cards and added a new line. She came back, but I didn't need her to. That's how I knew I'd healed. There are no grand endings here. No final confrontations, no tearful reconciliations under the rain, just small moments. A pie on a doorstep, a lavender bloom, a letter rediscovered in an old book, and a woman who no longer needs to be rescued from her own silence. Sometimes Laurel texts me photos again. Sometimes I reply. Sometimes I don't. I let it be natural now. I don't chase it. I let the love that remains take its shape without force. My granddaughter wrote to me again, a drawing this time, our garden. Apparently a little crooked, but I recognized The bench, she'd remembered the wind chime too. I put it in the fridge. Because some things are still worth displaying, and some absences don't need to be filled, they need to be honoured. I keep to my quiet rituals now. I make tea, I read slowly, I talk to the bees. I write things down, just in case someone ever wants to understand who I was when no one was looking. And at night, when I turn out the light, I no longer check my phone. I no longer wonder who forgot me. I no longer hold out hope like a gift no one asked for. I simply closed my eyes and said to myself, I wasn't angry, I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. Sometimes in the morning, when the light hits the hallway mirror just right, I catch sight of myself and pause, not because I'm startled, but because I'm different. Not in the way age makes you different, the softened jawline, the silver threaded through your hair, the slight stoop of your shoulders. No, this is something deeper. I used to look in the mirror and see someone waiting. Now I see someone who has arrived. It's a quiet sort of transformation, not the kind that demands praise or documentation. Just a subtle shift in how I move through my own space, how I hold my mug, how I let my phone go unchecked for hours, how I choose my words with more care, because not everything needs to be said, and not every silence needs to be filled. I've learned that peace is not found in the arms of others. It's not given as a reward for loyalty or sacrifice. It's not even something people can give you at all. Peace is what remains when you stop chasing. That understanding came slowly, but now it lives in me like a second pulse. I take walks most evenings now, not far, just to the edge of the park. And back, I don't bring my phone. I don't count my steps, I just walk. Last week, I saw a mother with 2 children. The younger one, a boy maybe 6 or 7, kept reaching for her hand and then letting go to chase a squirrel, then returning again. She didn't look down at him, but she adjusted her pace each time. That struck me. I thought about how many years I spent adjusting, slowing, holding, anchoring, and how often those adjustments went unseen. That's what mothers do, though we move around our children like water around stone, always adapting, always carrying. But even water recedes eventually, and stone, if it's not cared for, begins to crack. After my walk, I returned home to find a letter waiting in the mailbox, this time not from Laurel, from her daughter, my granddaughter. Her handwriting was still uneven, but the envelope had stickers, and my name was written in big, careful letters across the front. Inside was a note and a folded piece of art paper with a drawing. The note said, "Dear Grandma, I asked Mom if we could come visit your house soon. I miss your stories and the tea you let me sip even though it's too grown up. Mom said maybe. I hope it's a yes. I'm sending you a picture I made at school. It's a garden with all the flowers I remember. Love, Rosie." The drawing had a little sun in the corner, 3 purple flowers, and a crooked path leading up to a door with a yellow knob. My house. She remembered the knob. That detail brought tears to my eyes in a way nothing else had for weeks. She remembered, not the timeshare, not the holidays, not the missed calls. She remembered the garden, the tea, the yellow doorknob, the parts of me that mattered most. I placed her letter in the wooden box on my shelf, the one where I keep the notes that remind me I still exist in someone's memory. I don't know if Laurel will bring her. Maybe she will, maybe she won't, but it's no longer something I hinge myself on. I don't need to be needed in the same way. I've learned that presence, real, meaningful presence, doesn't begin with being invited. It begins with being whole before the door ever opens. A few days later, I took out one of the old photo albums, not the digital kind, but the heavy leather-bound ones that smell like time. I flipped through pages of birthdays, beach trips, and the first days of school. Richard laughing in a chair, Laurel in pigtails, me holding a cake too big for the plate, and then I reached a photo I hadn't noticed in years. It was taken one summer at the timeshare. Long before the arguments, the distance, the disappointment. I was in a wide-brimmed hat, sitting with a book in one hand and a mug in the other, no one else in the frame, just me, and I was smiling. Not at someone, just smiling. Fully, I traced the edge of the photo with my finger. There she was, the woman in the mirror now, quiet, content, and enough. I took the photo out and framed it. Put it on the shelf near the window, next to the candle I light. When I write, a small altar to myself, not in arrogance, but in remembrance, because for so long I kept the altar for everyone else, the anniversaries, the traditions, the birthdays. The stories I told over and over again to remind them who they were. Now I tell the stories to remember who I was, and still am. I think about the timeshare sometimes, but not with bitterness, just clarity. I wonder if they'll ever fully understand why I sold it. Maybe someday they will. Maybe Rosie will ask when she's older. Maybe she'll read my note cards, open the wooden box, and feel the threads I left behind. And if she does, I hope she learns this. You don't lose people by saying no. You lose yourself by saying yes to everything that empties you. It's late afternoon now. The sky is pale and stretching. I've just finished another card to myself. I wrote, the real return is not when they come back, it's when you stop needing them to. I place it gently into the box, and then I return to my chair. The one by the window, the one that holds me without demand. Outside, the lavender hums with bees, the light moves slowly, like me, and for the first time in a long, long while I am still, I am whole, and I am home.